Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're going to continue our reading of Flow by Mihaly C. I call him Mr. C because I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Anyways, this book was inspired by an animated film I saw with the same name, Flow. And I'll leave you with the official website of the animated film down in the description box below, and you guys can check it out. It won an Academy Award for Best Animated Film for 2025, I think it was. Anyways, congratulations. Um, and I think it's streaming in like Amazon Prime or something like that. But anyways, if you get a chance to see it, watch it. It's really good. It's a really good animated film. I don't think it has anything to do with this book, but I thought it was the same name and it would be interesting to read what this book is all about. So, all right. So today we're reading chapter 7, and this is part 2. Okay. Okay, here we go. Autotelic jobs. Serafina, Joe, and Ting are examples of people who have developed an autotelic personality. Despite the severe limitations of the environment, they were able to change constraints into opportunities for expressing their freedom and creativity. Their method represents one way to enjoy one's job while making it richer. The other is to change the job itself until its conditions are more conducive to flow. Even for people who lack autotelic personalities, the more a job inherently resembles a game with variety, appropriate, and flexible challenges, clear goals, and immediate feedback, the more enjoyable it will be, regardless of the worker's level of development. Hunting, for instance, is a good example of, quote, work that by its very nature had all the characteristics of flow. For hundreds and thousands of years, chasing down game was the main productive activity in which humans were involved. Yet, hunting has proven to be so enjoyable that many people are still doing it as a hobby. I think that's terrible. Just a side note, those poor deers. Those deers are so cute. Just hunting them for fun is just horrible. I'm sorry. I just had to put that in there. Oh. It's just one of my pet peeves. After all practical need for it has disappeared. My apologies to all the hunters out there who likes to hunt. I'm just very sad, very, very, very sad for the deer and the target that you're hunting. They're just so innocent and beautiful. The same is true for fishing. The pastoral mode of existence also has some of the freedom and flow-like structure of earliest, quote, work. Many contemporary young Navajos in Arizona claim that following their sheep on horseback over the mesas is the most enjoyable thing they ever do. And there's a footnote in the back on Navajos that's when I highlight it, that's what it means. So we'll read that when we finish this paragraph here. Compared to hunting or herding, farming is more difficult to enjoy. It is a more settled, more repetitive activity, and the results take much longer to appear. The seeds planted in spring need months to bear fruit. To enjoy agriculture, one must play within a much longer time frame than in hunting. While the hunter may choose his quarry and method of attack several times each day, the farmer decides what crops to plant, where, and in what quantity only a few times each year. In order to succeed, the farmer must make lengthy preparations and endure chancy periods of waiting helplessly for the weather to cooperate. It is not surprising to learn that populations of nomads or hunters, when forced to become farmers, appear to have died out rather than submitting themselves to that ostensibly boring existence. Yet many farmers also eventually learn to enjoy the more subtle opportunities of their occupation. All right, let's read the footnote on the Navajos. Excuse me. Navajos. Interviews with Navajo shepherds were conducted by Professor Massimini's group in the summers of 1984 and 1985. The crafts and cottage industries that before the 18th century occupied most of the time, left free from farming, were reasonably well designed in terms of providing flow. English weavers, for example, had their looms at home and worked with their entire family according to self-imposed schedules. They set their own goals for production and modified them according to what they thought they could accomplish. If the weather was good, they quit so they could work in the orchard or the vegetable garden. When they felt like they would sing a few ballads, and when a piece of cloth was finished, they all celebrated with a wee drink. And let's see here. English weavers. The life of 17th and 18th century English weavers is described by E.P. Thompson, 1963. This arrangement still functions in some parts of the world that have been able to maintain a more humane pace of production despite all the benefits of modernization. For instance, Professor Massimini and his team have interviewed weavers in the province of Bela in northern Italy, whose pattern of working resembles that of the fabled English weavers of over 2 centuries ago. Each of these families owns 2 to 10 mechanical looms that can be supervised by a single person. The father may watch the looms early in the morning, then call in his son to take over while he goes looking for mushrooms in the forest or stops by the creek to fish for trout. The son runs the machines until he gets bored, at which point the mother takes over. In their interviews, every member of the families listed weaving as the most enjoyable activity they did. More than traveling, more than going to discos, more than fishing, and certainly more than watching TV. The reason that working was so much fun is that it was continually challenging. Family members designed their own patterns, and when they had had enough of one kind, they would switch to another. Each family decided what type of cloth to weave, where to buy the materials, how much to produce, and where to sell it. Some families had customers as far away as Japan and Australia. Family members were always traveling to manufacturing centers to keep abreast of new technical developments or to buy necessary equipment as cheaply as possible. But throughout most of the Western world, such cozy arrangements conducive to flow were brutally disrupted by the intervention of the first power looms and the centralized factory system they spawned. By the middle of the 18th century, family crafts in England were generally unable to compete with mass production. Families were broken up, workers had to leave their cottages and move en masse into ugly and unwholesome plants. Rigid schedules lasting from dawn to dusk were enforced. Children as young as 7 years of age had to work themselves to exhaustion among indifferent or exploitive strangers. If the enjoyment of work had any credibility before, it was effectively destroyed in that first frenzy of industrialization. Now we have entered a new post-industrial age, and work is said to be becoming benign again. The typical laborer now sits in front of a bank of dials, supervising a computer screen in a pleasant control room, while a band of savvy robots down the line do whatever, quote, real work needs to be done. In fact, most people do not are not engaged in production any longer. They work in the so-called quote service sector as jobs that would surely appear like pampered leisure to the farmers and factory workers of only a few generations ago. Above them are the managers and professionals who have great leeway in making whatever they want to of their jobs. So work can be either brutal or boring. or enjoyable and exciting. In just a few decades, as happened in England in the 1740s, the average working conditions can change from being relatively pleasant to a nightmare. Technological innovations such as the water wheel, the plow, the steam engine, electricity, or the silicon chip can make a tremendous difference in whether work will be enjoyable or not. Laws regulating the enclosure of the commons, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of apprentices, or the institution of the 40-hour week and of minimum wages can also have a great impact. The sooner we realize that the quality of the work experience can be transformed at will, the sooner we can improve this enormously important dimension of life. Yet, most people still believe that work is forever destined to remain, quote, the curse of Adam. In theory, any job could be changed so as to make it more enjoyable by following the prescriptions of the flow model. At present, however, whether work is enjoyable or not ranks quite low among the concerns of those who have the power to influence the nature of a given job. Management has to care for productivity first and foremost, and union bosses have to keep safety, security, and compensations uppermost in their minds. In the short run, these priorities might well conflict with flow producing conditions. This is regrettable because if workers really enjoyed their jobs, they would not only benefit personally, but sooner or later they would almost certainly produce more efficiently and reach all the other goals that now take precedence. At the same time, it would be erroneous to expect that if all jobs were constructed like games, everyone would enjoy them. Even the most favorable external conditions do not guarantee that a person will be in flow, because optimal experience depends on a subjective evaluation of what the possibilities for action are and of one's own capabilities. It happens quite often that an individual will be discontented even with a potentially great job. Let us take as an example the profession of surgery. Few jobs involve so much responsibility or bestow so much status on its practitioners. Certainly, if challenges and skills are significant factors, then surgeons must find their job exhilarating. And in fact, many surgeons say that they are addicted to their work, that nothing else in their lives compares with it in terms of enjoyment, that anything that takes them away from the hospital, a Caribbean vacation, a night at the opera, feels like a waste of time. But not every surgeon is as enthusiastic about his job. Some grow so bored by it that they take up drinking, gambling, or a fast lifestyle to forget its drudgery. How can such a widely diverging views of the same profession be possible? One reason is that surgeons who settle down for well-paid but repetitive routines soon begin to feel the tedium. There are surgeons who only cut out appendices or tonsils. A few even specialize in piercing earlobes. Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Such specialization can be lucrative, but it makes enjoying the job more difficult. At the other extreme, there are competitive super surgeons who go off the deep end in the other direction, constantly needing new challenges, wanting to perform spectacular uh, new surgical procedures until they finally can't meet the expectations they have set for themselves. Surgical pioneers burn out for the opposite reason of the routine specialists. They have accomplished the impossible once, but they haven't found a way to do it again. Okay, let's read the footnote on surgeons. The flow interviews of surgeons were conducted by Dr. Jean Hamilton and written up by her and I.C., Mr. C. That's from Mr. C, 1975, page 123 to 139. You know, I kept saying Mr. C. I don't know if that initial I or M is a male or female. Anyways, oh well. Okay. Those surgeons who enjoy their work usually practice in hospitals that allow variety and a certain amount of experimentation with the latest techniques, and that make research and teaching part of the job. The surgeons who like what they do mention money, prestige, and saving lives as being important to them, but they state that their greatest enthusiasm is for the intrinsic aspects of the job. What makes surgery so special for them is the feeling one gets from the activity itself. And the way they describe that feeling is in almost every detail similar to the flow experiences reported by athletes, artists, or the cook who butchered the meat for the Lord away. The explanation for this is that surgical operations have all the characteristics that a flow activity should have. Surgeons mention, for instance, how well defined their goals are. An internist deals with problems that are less specific and localized, and a psychiatrist with even more vague and ephemeral symptoms and solutions. By contrast, the surgeon's task is crystal clear to cut out the tumor or set the bone or get some organ pumping away again. Once that task is accomplished, he can sew up the incision and turn to the next patient with the sense of a job well done. Similarly, surgery provides immediate and continuous feedback. If there is no blood in the cavity, the operation is going well. Then the diseased tissue comes out or the bone is set. The stitches take or not, if that is the case, but throughout the process, one knows exactly how successful one is, and if not, why not? For this reason alone, most surgeons believe that what they are doing is so much more enjoyable than any other branch of medicine or any other job on earth. At another level, there is no lack of challenges in surgery. In the words of one surgeon, I get intellectual enjoyment, like the chess player or the academic who studies ancient Mesopotamian toothpicks. Mesopotamian toothpicks, that's funny. The craft is enjoyable, like carpentry is fun. The gratification of taking an extremely difficult problem and making it go. And another, it's very satisfying, and if it is somewhat difficult, it is also exciting. It's very nice to make things work again, to put things in their right place so that it looks like it should and fits neatly. This is very pleasant, particularly when the group works together in a smooth and efficient manner. Then the aesthetics of the whole situation can be appreciated. Okay, let's see. There's a couple of footnotes here. Huh. Okay, the first two quotations are from Mr. C, 1975, page 129. The next two from IBIT, page 136. Okay, what's that mean? First two and next two. Okay, so we read the first, oops, sorry. We read the first two, so I think the next two is coming up. All right. The second quote indicates that the challenges of an operation are not limited to what the surgeon must do personally, but include coordinating an event that involves a number of additional players. Many surgeons comment on how exhilarating it is to be a part of a well-trained team that functions smoothly and efficiently. And of course, there's always the possibility of doing things better, of improving one's skills. An eye surgeon commented, you use fine and precise instruments. It is an exercise in art. It all rests on how precisely and artistically you do the operation. Remarked another surgeon, it is important to watch for details, to be neat and technically efficient. I don't like to waste motion and so try to make the operation as well planned and thought out as possible. I'm particular about how the needle is held, where the stitches are placed, the type of suture, and so on. Things should look the best and seem easy. The way surgery is practiced helps block out distractions and concentrates all one's attention on the procedure. The operating theater is indeed like a stage with spotlights illuminating the action and the actors. Before an operation, surgeons go through steps of preparation, purification, and dressing up in special garments, like athletes before a contest or priests before a ceremony. These rituals have a practical purpose, but they also serve to separate celebrants from the concerns of everyday life and focus their minds on the event to be enacted. Some surgeons say that on the mornings before an important operation, they put themselves on, quote, automatic pilot by eating the same breakfast, wearing the same clothes, and driving to the hospital by the same route. They do so not because they are superstitious, but because they sense that this habitual behavior makes it easier for them to devote their undivided attention to the challenge ahead. Surgeons are lucky. Not only are they paid well, not only do they bask in respect and admiration, but they also have a job built according to the blueprint of flow activities. Notwithstanding all these advantages, there are surgeons who go out of their minds because of boredom or because they're reaching after unattainable power and fame. What this indicates is that important as the structure of a job is, by itself, it won't determine whether or not a person performing that job will find enjoyment in it. Satisfaction in a job will also depend on whether or not a worker has an autotelic personality. Joe the welder enjoyed tasks that few would regard as providing opportunities for flow. At the same time, some surgeons manage to hate a job that seems to have been intentionally created to provide enjoyment. To improve the quality of life through work, two complementary strategies are necessary. On the one hand, jobs should be redesigned so that they resemble as closely as possible flow activities, as do hunting, cottage weaving, and surgery. But it will also be necessary to help people develop autotetic personalities like those of Serafina, Joe, and Ting by training them to recognize opportunities for action, to hone their skills, to set reachable goals. Neither one of these strategies is likely to make work much more enjoyable by itself. In combination, they should contribute enormously to optimal experience. I think the education system should do the same, make it more fun and intrinsically appealing as opposed to, um, test all the time. The paradox of work. It is easier to understand the way work affects the quality of life when we take the long view and compare ourselves with people from different times and cultures. But eventually, we have to look more closely at what is happening here and now. Ancient Chinese cooks, alpine farmers, surgeons, and welders help illuminate the potential inherent in work. But they are not, after all, very typical of the kind of job most people do nowadays. What is work like for average American adults today? In our studies, we have often encountered a strange inner conflict in the way people relate to the way they make their living. On the one hand, our subjects usually report that they have had some of their most positive experiences while on the job. From this response, it would follow that they would wish to be working, that their motivation on the job would be high. Instead, even when they feel good, people generally say that they would prefer not to be working, that their motivation on the job is low. The converse is also true. When supposedly enjoying their hard-earned leisure, people generally report surprisingly low moods, yet they keep on wishing for more leisure. For example, in one study, we used the experience sampling method to answer the question, do people report more instances of flow at work or in leisure? The respondents, over 100 men and women working full-time at a variety of occupations, wore an electronic pager for 1 week, and whenever the pager beeped in response to signals sent at 8 random times each day For a week, they filled out 2 pages of a booklet to record what they were doing and how they felt at the moment they were signaled. Among other things, they were asked to indicate on 10-point scales how many challenges they saw at the moment and how many skills they felt they were using. A person was counted as being in flow every time he or she marked both the level of challenges and the level of skills to be above the mean level for the week. In this particular study, over 4,800 responses were collected, an average of about 44 per person per week. In terms of the criterion we had adopted, 33% of these responses were, quote, in flow. That is, above the mean personal weekly level of challenges and skills. Of course, this method of defining flow is rather liberal. If one only wished to include extremely complex flow experiences, say those with the highest levels of challenges and skills, perhaps fewer than 1% of the responses would qualify as flow. The methodological convention adopted here to define flow functions somewhat like a microscope, depending on the level of magnification used. Very different detail will be visible. As expected, the more time a person spent in flow during the week, the better was the overall quality of his or her reported experience. People who were more often in flow were especially likely to feel, quote, strong, active, creative, concentrated, and motivated. What was unexpected, however, is how frequently people reported flow situations at work and how rarely in leisure. When people were signaled while they were actually working at their jobs, which happened only about 3/4 of the time, because as it turns out, the remaining 1/4 of the time on the job, these average workers were daydreaming, gossiping, or engaged in personal business. The proportion of responses in flow was a high 54%. In other words, about half the time that people were working, they feel they are confronting above average challenges and using above average skills. In contrast, when engaged in leisure activities such as reading, watching TV, having friends over, or going to a restaurant, only 18% of the responses ended up in flow. The leisure responses were typically in the range we have come to call apathy, characterized by below average levels of both challenges and skills. In this condition, people tend to say that they feel passive, weak, dull, and dissatisfied. When people were working, 16% of the responses were in the apathy region. In leisure, over half, 52%. As one would expect, managers and supervisors were significantly more often in flow at work, 64%, than were clerical workers, 51%, and blue-collar workers, 47%. Blue-collar workers reported more flow in leisure, 20%, than clerical workers, 16%, and managers, 15%, did. But even workers on an assembly line reported they were in flow more than twice as often at work as in leisure, 47% versus 20%. Conversely, apathy was reported at work more often by blue-collar workers than by managers, 23% versus 11%. And in leisure, more often by managers than by blue-collar workers, 61% versus 46%. Whenever people were in flow, either at work or in leisure, they reported it as a much more positive experience than the times they were not in flow. When challenges and skills were both high, they felt happier, more cheerful, stronger, more active. They concentrated more, they felt more creative and satisfied. All these differences in the quality of experience were very significant statistically, and they were more or less the same for every kind of worker. There was only a single exception to this general trend. One of the questions in the response booklet asked respondents to indicate, again on a 10-point scale from no to yes, their answer to the following question. Did you wish you had been doing something else? The extent to which a person answers this with a no is generally a reliable indication of how motivated he or she is at the moment of the signal. The results showed that people wish to be doing something else to a much greater extent than working than when at leisure, and this regardless of whether they were in flow. In other words, motivation was low at work even when it was provided flow, and it was high in leisure even when the quality of experience was low. Thus, we have the paradoxical situation. On the job, people feel skillful and challenged, and therefore feel more happy, strong, creative, and satisfied. In their free time, people feel that there is generally not much to do and their skills are not being used, and therefore they tend to feel more sad, weak, dull, and dissatisfied. Yet they would like to work less and spend more time in leisure. What does this contradictory pattern mean? There are several possible explanations, but one conclusion seems inevitable. When it comes to work, people do not heed the evidence of their senses. They disregard the quality of immediate experience and base their motivation instead on the strongly rooted cultural stereotype of what work is supposed to be like. They think of it as an imposition, a constraint, an infringement of their freedom, and therefore something to be avoided as much as possible. It could be argued that although flow at work is enjoyable, people cannot stand high levels of challenge all the time. They need to recover at home, to turn into couch potatoes for a few hours each day, even though they don't enjoy it. But comparative examples seem to contradict this argument. For instance, the farmers of Point Trentaz work much harder and for longer hours than the average American, and the challenges they face in their daily round require at least as high levels of concentration and involvement. Yet they don't wish to be doing something else while working. And afterward, instead of relaxing, they fill their free time with demanding leisure activities. As these findings suggest, the apathy of many of the people around us is not due to their being physically or mentally exhausted. The problem seems to lie more in the modern worker's relation to his job, with the way he perceives his goals in relation to it. When we feel that we are investing attention to a task in a task against our will, it is as if our psychic energy is being wasted. Instead of helping us reach our goals, it is called upon to make someone else's come true. The time channeled into such a task is perceived as time subtracted from the total available for our life. Many people consider their jobs as something they have to do, a burden imposed from the outside, an effort that takes life away from the ledger of their existence. So even though the momentary on the job experience may be positive, they tend to discount it because it does not contribute to their own long range goals. It should be stressed, however, that quote dissatisfaction is a relative term. According to a large scale national surveys conducted between 1972 and 1978, only 3% of American workers said they were very dissatisfied with their jobs, while 52% said they were very satisfied, one of the highest rates in industrialized nations. But one can love one's job and still be displeased with some aspects of it and try to improve what is not perfect. In our studies, we find that American workers tend to mention three main reasons for their dissatisfaction with their jobs, all of which are related to the quality of experience and typically available to them at work, even though, as we have just seen, their experience at work tends to be better than it is at home. Contrary to popular opinion, salary and other material concerns are generally not among their most pressing concerns. The first and perhaps most important complaint concerns the lack of variety and challenge. This can be a problem for everyone, but especially for those in lower level occupations in which routine plays a major role. The second has to do with conflicts with other people on the job, especially bosses. The third reason involves burnout, too much pressure, too much stress, too little time to think for oneself, too little time to spend with the family. This is a factor that particularly troubles the higher echelons, executives and managers. Okay, let's read about the American workers and dissatisfaction. The ESM study that looks at how much flow American workers report on their job and in leisure was reported in Mr. C and Lefevre. Sorry, I butchered that name. Uh, Lefevre. Okay, whatever. 1987, 1989, and Lefevre, 1988. Um, Sorry, Mr. Lefevre. I butchered your name really good there. Uh, okay, dissatisfaction. The low percentages of dissatisfied workers were computed by a meta-analysis performed in 1980 on 15 national surveys between 1972 and 1978. See Argyle, 1987, page 32. Our studies of American workers, in addition to the ESM studies, here I am drawing on data I've collected over a period of 5 years, 1984 to 88, on about 400 managers from different companies and all parts of the country who have attended the Vail Management Seminars organized by the Office of Continuing Education of the University of Chicago. Okay. Such complaints are real enough as they refer to objective conditions, yet they can be addressed by a subjective shift in one's consciousness, variety and challenge, for instance, are in one sense inherent characteristics of jobs, but they also depend on how one perceives opportunities. Ting, Serafina, and Joe saw challenges in tasks that most people would find dull and meaningless. Whether a job has variety or not ultimately depends more on a person's approach to it than on actual working conditions. The same is true of the other causes of dissatisfaction. Getting along with coworkers and supervisors might be difficult, but generally can be managed if one makes the attempt. Conflict at work is often due to a person's feeling defensive out of fear of losing face. To prove himself, he sets certain goals for how others should treat him, and then expects rigidly that others will fulfill those expectations. This rarely happens as planned, however, because others also have an agenda for their own rigid goals to be achieved. Perhaps the best way to avoid this impasse is to set the challenge of reaching one's goals while helping the boss and colleagues reach theirs. It is less direct and more time consuming than forging ahead to satisfy one's interest, regardless of what happens to others, but in the long run, it seldom fails. Finally, stresses and pressures are clearly the most subjective aspects of a job, and therefore the ones that should be most amenable to the control of consciousness. Stress exists only if we experience it. It takes the most extreme objective conditions to cause it directly. The same amount of pressure will wilt one person and be a welcome challenge to another. There are hundreds of ways to relieve stress, some based on better organization, delegation of responsibility, better communication with coworkers and supervisors. Others are based on factors external to the job, such as improved home life, leisure patterns, or inner disciplines like transcendental meditation. This piecemeal solutions may help, but the only real answer to coping with work stress is to consider it part of a general strategy to improve the overall quality of experience. Of course, this is easier said than done. To do so involves mobilizing psychic energy and keeping it focused on personally forged goals, despite inevitable distractions. Various ways of coping with external stress will be discussed later in Chapter 9. Now, it may be useful to consider how the use of leisure time contributes or fails to contribute to the overall quality of life. The waste of free time. Although, as we have seen, people generally long to leave their places of work and get home, ready to put their hard-earned free time to good use. All too often, they have no idea what to do there. Ironically, jobs are actually easier to enjoy than free time because, like flow activities, they have built-in goals, feedback, and rules and challenges, all of which encourage one to become involved in one's work, to concentrate and lose oneself in it. Free time, on the other hand, is unstructured and requires much greater effort to be shaped into something that can be enjoyed. Hobbies that demand skill, habits that set goals and limits, personal interests, and especially inner discipline help to make leisure what it is supposed to be, a chance for recreation. But on the whole, people miss the opportunity to enjoy leisure even more thoroughly than they do with working time. Over 60 years ago, the great American sociologist Robert Park already noted, it is in the improvement use of our leisure, sorry, it is in the improvident use of our leisure, I suspect, that the greatest wastes of American life occur. The tremendous leisure activity that has arisen in the last few generations has been designed to help fill free time with enjoyable experiences. Nevertheless, instead of using our physical and mental resources to experience flow, most of us spend many hours each week watching celebrated athletes playing in enormous stadiums. Instead of making music, we listen to platinum records cut by millionaire musicians. Instead of making art, we go to admire paintings that brought in the highest bids at the latest auction. We do not run risks acting on our beliefs, but occupy hours each day watching actors who pretend to have adventures, engaged in mock meaningful actions. Okay. Okay, the footnote about jobs are easier to enjoy. The leisure can be a problem for many people, has been recognized for a long time by psychologists and psychiatrists. For example, the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry ended one of its reports in 1958 with the bold statement, quote, for many Americans, leisure is dangerous, unquote. The same conclusion was reached by Gusson, 1967, who reviewed some of the psychological ills that people who cannot adapt to leisure manifest. The role of television as a way of masking the perils of free time has also been often remarked upon. For instance, Conrad, 1982, page 108, writes, the original technological revolution was about saving time, shortcutting labor. The consumerism, which is the latest installment of that revolution, is about wasting the time we've saved, and the institution it deputes to serve that purpose is television. And the footnote on leisure industry, it is difficult to estimate the economic value of leisure because the worth of federal land used for recreation and the cost of the space uh, devoted to leisure at home and in public buildings are truly incalculable. Direct spending on leisure in the United States has been estimated at $160 billion dollars for 1980, double the amount for 1970 when adjusted for inflation. The average household spends about 5% of its income directly on leisure. Kelly, 1982, page 9. This vicarious participation is able to mask, at least temporarily, the underlying emptiness of wasted time, but it is a very pale substitute for attention invested in real challenges. The flow experience that results from the use of skills leads to growth. Passive entertainment leads nowhere. Collectively, we are wasting each year the equivalent of millions of years of human consciousness, the energy that could be used to focus on complex goals to provide for enjoyable growth is squandered on the patterns of stimulation that only mimic reality. Mass leisure, mass culture, and even high culture, when only attended to passively and for extrinsic reasons, such as the wish to flaunt one's status, are parasites of the mind. They absorb psychic energy without providing substantive strength in return. They leave us more exhausted, more disheartened than we were before. Isn't that a true statement? They are kind of like parasites, isn't it? You could kind of feel it. I haven't had a TV in about 40 years, 30 years at least. Um, and when I open my, just a side note, sorry, when I opened my healing center for the cats, holistic healing center for the animals, I bought a TV just for them. But even then, I don't have cable. I just, play soft music or anti-anxiety music for the cats and the dogs when they come. That's on YouTube and it's free. That's about the extent of it. Well, but now, YouTube has a lot of free stuff. So that's another form of addiction. Anyways, but it is a passive experience that doesn't require any kind of thinking or critical thinking or active involvement. And you could almost feel your energy being sucked away. If you're sensitive to energy, not everybody is. Unless a person takes charge of them, both work and free time are likely to be disappointing. Most jobs and many leisure activities, especially those involving the passive consumption of mass media, are not designed to make us happy and strong. Their purpose is to make money for someone else. If we allow them to, they can suck out the marrow of our lives, leaving only feeble husks. But like everything else, work and leisure can be appropriated for our needs. People who learn to enjoy their work, who do not waste their free time, end up feeling that their lives as a whole have become much more worthwhile. Quote, "The future," wrote C.K. Brightbill, "will belong not only to the educated man, but to the man who is educated to use his leisure wisely." Unquote. And that's the end of chapter 7. Wow, very interesting. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and we will continue a new chapter next week. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day and stay safe out there. It's a crazy world we live in. Bye bye.